Hello and welcome to the second part of the video series on assessment. If you remember, in the first section of the video I talked about why assessment was important and how it contributes to organisational performance. In the second part of the assessment video series I'm going to talk about how assessment works and what it tells us about people. How does it work? How is assessment able to identify the right person for the right role, for the right organisation, and identify people who might be your future leaders and your future managers? So I'd like to talk a little bit about what it is that determines who we are, how we work, and what kind of roles would be a best fit for us. Now, sadly, not all of us can be astronauts when we grow up. Some of us are destined to be salespeople, some of us might be nurses or teachers or coaches, sales managers, customer service staff, we might be chefs, any number of roles, and there's something inside of us that really determines where we're going to fit best and what kind of roles and what kind of hierarchical levels we're going to find most comfortable. So, if we look at the first internal trait that really determines where we're going to fit, the first thing we need to look at is what are our internal drivers. By internal drivers I mean those values, those needs that we have that need to be fulfilled. And let's remember that we spend most of our conscious life in the workplace, so where we're looking for that fulfillment is most likely to come in the workplace. And everybody has their unique individual drivers that need to be satisfied. And the second thing that really determines where we're going to fit, and also perhaps the kind of job that we would find most satisfying, are our personality traits. So, for example, how open we are, how we relate to other people, how confident we are, how naturally leader-like we are. These will all determine the kind of roles and the kind of levels that we're going to settle into. We also need to consider some barriers that we might have. That not all of us are suited to different jobs, and particularly when we're under pressure, there are some personality traits that may emerge that might hold us back, that might be a barrier to us pursuing certain roles or certain levels in organisations, and we need to understand what those are too. Of course, we also need knowledge and skills for certain jobs. These are relatively easy to develop, but they also do determine whether we're qualified for a particular role. So, if we put all of these elements together, our internal drivers, our traits, our potential barriers, our knowledge and skills, what we find is that this blend of desire and ability can be summed up in terms of our potential, in terms of how far can we go and what would be the best direction for us to move in. So if we can really assess and measure and understand these different internal traits, then we can be very effective in placing people in the right jobs and putting people at the right levels in our organisation. So let's just look at a couple of short examples of how this might work, about how we might look at these internal values and traits and to determine what would be the best role and the best level for two different people. So I'd like you to meet Kun Sherry and Kun Sam, and we'll be looking at their assessment data and determining what would be the best fit for these two people. So, if we start off looking at the person's, remember I said the first thing to understand is that person's internal values, that person's internal drives. So here we have the internal drives of Kun Sam. And it doesn't really matter whether you understand how the information is presented, because what you need to understand about Kun Sam when we look at this profile is that he is somebody who has strong drives around power and tradition and commerce. So he's somebody who's going to feel comfortable working in a culture, in an organisation where individual contributions are appreciated, where people are expected to be responsible and accountable for their own performance, very serious, very practical, very result oriented, where change is very gradual if it happens at all, where there's a strong emphasis on continuity and tradition and being very professional in how you go about your work. If we contrast that with the inner drives of Kun Sherry, you can see Sherry has very different drives. So she's somebody who's really looking for a high-profile role,
who wants to be noticed, who wants to have responsibility. Yes, she wants to be successful, but she also wants to work with people and be part of a team and to be able to influence people and for everybody to succeed together. And she also likes working in much more informal types of environments, much more creative, much more relaxed, with much fewer rules, where change is really a part of the role and a part of the culture of the organization. So we see here two very different value drivers here. And understanding these value drivers will help match these two people with the right organizations. You can understand that these people will be happy and feel fulfilled and engaged in very different cultures and very different organizations. So moving along and looking at their everyday personality traits. Again, if we look at Sam first, we can see very clearly when we look at Sam's traits that Sam is best suited to a role where Sam is responsible for structure, compliance and quality. Sam likes to take charge and direct people, but what Sam's really interested in is telling people what to do and how to do it. And some challenges for Sam around his personality traits may be around flexibility and change and openness. So Sam likes a very rigid structure and a very clear process to follow and to direct other people to follow that. And if we move down and look at Sherry's traits again, what we see here is that Sherry really wants to be the leader. She wants to take charge. And she's naturally somebody who's very engaged with people and very engaging and very influential, somebody who's very open and much more of a strategic thinker and creative, and she likes to influence people with her ideas and discuss her ideas with other people. So again, you can see very different roles also to go along with those very different values that would fit these two different people. And finally, on the personality side, if we look at what we call the dark side, the under pressure profile, if you like. If we look at Sam again first, that we see that when Sam becomes stressed and pressured, he's like to have some issues with trusting other people, and with being a little overcritical, and also with being very rigid and inflexible in terms of how things are done. He's somebody who wants something done very much his way. Compare this with Sherry's potential derailers. The challenge here for Sherry is that she's so effective with people and she's so confident in her ability. Under pressure, she might become a little overconfident, maybe a little dominating, maybe might be imposing her ideas and her creativity on other people. So she might just need to slow down. She might be taking a few too many chances and risks, and she may need to think things through a little bit more carefully and making sure she's including all the people and not just selling her ideas too strongly. So we can see here two very, very different people who would suit very different organizations and very different roles in the organizations. So Sherry's leaning much more towards a management, a leadership, an inspiring kind of role, and things are looking quite promising for Sherry in terms of moving up into fairly senior hierarchical roles. Whereas for Sam, Sam's looking at a much more limited type of role where he's responsible for ensuring compliance, and the challenge for Sam's really going to be managing and influencing other people. So that's certainly going to be a barrier for Sam moving into a management role. So now as an organisation we can begin to see the different levels of potential and also the different areas of fit for these two people. IQ is another really important predictor of performance. In fact, studies show it's the most reliable predictor of performance. So if we look at the IQ scores for these two people, we see Sam and Sherry have very different performances on the IQ test as well. Sam scored generally below average on the IQ test, whereas Sherry scored significantly above average. So this tells us that Sam is likely to struggle with handling ambiguity and complexity, and Sherry is likely to be very comfortable and in fact seek out very challenging, more complex, more strategic thinking type roles. So again, this is supporting Sherry having the potential to move into more senior management and leadership roles, whereas Sam's going to be in much more of a specialist, practical, hands-on type of role. Okay, so And I hope that clearly demonstrated to you how the assessment process works. By looking at these internal factors, these drivers, the personality traits, and the IQ, we can see very clear differences between people, and we can match people much more effectively to see whether they fit your organization, to see what kind of role they would fit, and to see how much potential they have. And we can also see their natural strengths and development areas, so we can start to build development plans to help people in areas where they might naturally be a little weak.
Okay, so I hope I've helped you understand in this session how really exploring and understanding people's internal drivers, their everyday personality traits, their potential personality derailers, and their IQ can help identify and fit people to the best organizational values fit for them, and also the best role and the right level within that organization. And we saw very different paths available there to Khun Sam and Khun Sherry. In the next video segment, I'll be exploring a little bit more about how to assess the knowledge and skills that I mentioned that was also an important part. But for now, thank you, and I hope you'll have time to watch the third segment.